We are diving deep today into what has to be one of the most high-stakes diplomatic tightropes we've seen a G7 nation walk in.
Hmm.
Well, in recent memory.
Oh,
We're
absolutely.
talking about Canada.
Yeah.
And specifically, Prime Minister Mark Carney's upcoming official visit to Beijing.
Yeah.
This is not just a photo op, it's a full-on, high-risk strategic maneuver.
It really is. I mean, this trip, it's set for January 13th to the 17th, 2026, and it's huge. It's the first time a Canadian PM has gone to China since 2017.
It's nearly a decade.
A decade of what our sources are calling, and I think rightly so, icy relations. They're not just trying to, warm things up. They're trying to rebuild the entire foundation.
And the stakes couldn't be higher. Carney himself has called 2026 a hinge moment.
Yeah.
The entire mission is built around this idea he calls a strategic reset. But here's the real question we need to unpack for you. Is this reset even structurally possible? Can Canada, a G7 partner, so deeply tied to the U.S., achieve what the strategists are calling variable geometry?
That phrase, variable geometry, it just perfectly captures how impossible this seems. It's basically asking, can you maintain your deep, absolutely essential security and economic integration with the United States,
Right.
while at the same time executing a major commercial pivot toward China? It's asking to be in two places at once.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack this strategy, to look at the history Canada's trying to follow here, the trade constraints they're under, and this is the big one, the immense pressure from Washington, what our sources are calling the Trump corollary.
So let's start with the new playbook. What's so interesting is that the Carney government isn't trying to sugarcoat this. They've given the strategy this very pragmatic name, functional realism.
Okay, functional realism. That sounds incredibly academic. So if I'm a Canadian farmer or, say, a tech executive, what does that actually mean for me, for my business?
It's really an attempt to decouple economic necessity from ideological friction. The whole idea is this. Canada needs to diversify. Its over-reliance on the U.S. market is just proving too volatile.
So functional realism says.
It says, look, we can and we will trade with you where it's profitable and it's safe, but that doesn't mean we're aligning on human rights, and it absolutely doesn't mean we're compromising our security alignment with the U.S. It's transactional diplomacy.
So not transformational,
Yeah.
strictly commercial. But is that even realistic? I mean, given the public memory of the two Michaels' detention after the Meng Wanzhou arrest, it feels a bit like political necessity being dressed up as a grand strategy.
Well, it is deeply necessary. And they know to pull off this external reset, they first need strength at home. The whole domestic goal here is to position Canada as a sovereign energy and food corridor to deal with all this North American trade volatility.
And the foundation for that just came into force, what, days ago? On January 1st, 2026, the Free Trade and Labor Mobility in Canada Act.
That's the one. That's the critical piece. It's designed to finally dismantle all those interprovincial trade barriers that have fragmented the Canadian economy for so long. The goal is to create a one Canadian economy.
So you can negotiate from a position of strength.
Exactly. Internal strength, not what the sources pretty harshly call fragmented provincial desperation. It's smart. You unite your base before you go out on a high-wire diplomatic act.
It definitely strengthens the position. But, if we look back, Canada's played this exact game before.
Yeah.
Threading that needle between U.S. pressure and Chinese opportunity.
History is probably the best defense for this strategy, actually. The perfect case is the wheat diplomacy of the 1960s.
Yes, this is such a great case study. Commercial pragmatism just completely overriding geopolitical pressure. Walk us through that.
Okay, so in the 1960s, U.S. policy toward the People's Republic of China was total isolation. Any Western nation that even thought about trading with Beijing faced serious wrath from Washington.
Right.
But China was facing a horrific famine. They desperately needed grain. So Canada, despite all the pressure from the U.S. Congress to fall in line, went ahead and established its first major trade link with the PRC through these massive grain sales.
So Canada basically chose to feed a nation and get huge contracts for its own farmers over pleasing its superpower neighbor.
They did. And that commercial link, it did more than just sell wheat. It paved the entire way for diplomacy. It led to official diplomatic recognition of the PRC in 1970.
A full 2 years before the United States.
Exactly. It shows this history of, frankly, daring independent foreign policy when a critical national economic interest is at stake.
That's defiance born of necessity. And there's another precedent, one that seems to be the model for this current reliance to resilience strategy, the softwood lumber blueprint.
Oh, the wood pivot is a textbook example of diversification born from pain. I mean, for decades, the BC forestry sector was just crippled by U.S. duties and protectionism. They relied on one very volatile customer.
And instead of just waiting for the duties to be lifted, which they never really were, they just decided to reorient the entire sector.
They pivoted hard. They set up Canada Wood in China and basically built a brand new market from scratch. And it was a huge success. BC wood exports went from almost zero in 2003 to over $1 billion by 2011. It proved Canada could shift its reliance away from a volatile American market toward a booming Asian one. That model is the blueprint for what Kearney's trying to do today.
Okay, so now compare that successful history with the total collapse of relations recently. It's what makes this reset so incredibly difficult. We all remember the freeze after 2018.
The Meng Wanzhou and two Michaels detentions.
And that all culminated in this painful but I think strategically revealing canola for EV dispute in 2024 and 2025.
This is where you see the scale of the trade war they're trying to unwind. This isn't just a diplomatic tiff, it's a real economic injury. It started back in September 2024. Canada, falling in line with some allies, slapped a huge 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles.
And the response from Beijing was fast. And it was targeted right at Canada's agricultural heartland.
Brutally targeted. By March 2025, a 100% tariff on Canadian canola oil and meal. Then, in August 2025, they added a 75.8% duty on canola seeds.
So that's everything.
That's everything. Together, it completely closed a market worth about $5 billion a year to Canadian farmers. That is devastating pain, and it's what triggered this whole diplomatic emergency.
So this is a rescue mission as much as it is a strategic reset. The good news, I guess, and the reason for this trip is that a thaw began back in October 2025.
Yes. Canada formally started a review of its 100% EV tariff. So the immediate focus of these talks in Beijing is transactional. It's about the mutual removal of these punitive tariffs on canola, pork, and EVs. They're just trying to trade their way back to normal.
But even if they succeed, they run smack into the biggest constraint of all, the U.S. geopolitical framework. And this brings us to what the sources are calling the hemispheric cage.
This is the shadow hanging over every single moment of Kearney's visit. The Trump administration's December 2025 national security strategy, it made explicit demands. It carved out a very significant Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
Okay, let's pause on that. A Trump corollary.
Mm-hmm.
The sources are telling us the U.S. isn't just issuing warnings anymore. They are operationalizing this doctrine.
Yeah.
With military force.
Exactly. This is not theoretical, it's actionable policy. The military operation in Venezuela in early January 2026, the one that led to the capture of President Nicolas Maduro, that signals a huge shift.
What was the demand?
Washington explicitly demanded that Venezuela cut all ties with China, Iran, Russia, and Cuba before it would be allowed to resume its critical oil production. The message to Canada couldn't be clearer. Alignment is mandatory.
That just dramatically changes the risk profile for this Beijing trip. And this is all happening at the same time as the 2026 CUSMA or USMCA joint review.
It's a pressure cooker. The timing is terrible. The U.S. is using CUSMA as its main tool for strategic alignment. U.S. business leaders are pushing hard for stricter terms to limit non-North American content.
What are they targeting specifically?
They're targeting Chinese transshipment. That's the field that Chinese goods, especially things like auto parts, are being shipped into North American supply chains, maybe through assembly plants in Mexico, and then getting rebranded as North American to dodge U.S. tariffs.
So the U.S. is afraid Canada could become a backdoor for Chinese products to get into the American market.
Precisely. And to protect that critical U.S. market access, which is the most vital economic artery Canada has, Ottawa is signaling it will align with Washington on these stricter rules of origin. It's a sacrifice to protect the continental relationship.
But if Canada agrees to harden CUSMA to satisfy the U.S., how much does that just completely undermine the very trade reset Kearney's trying to get with China?
That is the central constraint. The sources make it clear the U.S.-Canada relationship is, and I'm quoting here, unusually personalized and volatile. They're remembering things like that Ontario anti-tariff ad in October 2025. The U.S. is demanding a binary choice. It's an American-led world, or you're with the nations on the other side of the world. There is no middle ground.
So what leverage does Canada even have here? They can't just rely on diplomacy. They need some kind of economic muscle.
Their key leverage point is energy. specifically oil export through the new infrastructure. Carney is consciously positioning Canadian energy as a North American security guarantee.
Let's talk about the Trans Mountain expansion, TMX.
Right.
That pipeline is critical.
It is. TMX became operational in May 2024, and it nearly tripled Canada's pipeline capacity to 890,000 barrels a day. But here is the data point that gives Canada leverage.
Okay.
China is now the top buyer of Canadian oil through TMX. They're importing 207,000 barrels per day. That's more than the U.S. seaborne shipments of about 173,000.
That is a staggering shift. So Canada built the infrastructure that lets them choose their main customer. And now roughly 60% of all their seaborne oil is going to Asian markets.
It's massive. They basically built a geopolitical tool that looks like a pipeline. But, this leverage is also a vulnerability. The utility of TMX is constrained by production.
How so?
Well, production growth is only projected to increase by about 80,000 barrels a day in 2026. That means Canada can't satisfy growing Asian markets and maintain its traditional volumes to the U.S. They'll hit capacity constraints by 2028.
So every barrel becomes a strategic choice.
Every single barrel. And on top of that, the line was only 77% full in 2024 because the tolls are so high. So the economic viability itself is still a bit of a gamble.
So the economics are dicey even as the geopolitics are soaring. And it's not just economic friction either. We see Canada looking at things like potential Chinese financing for a high-speed rail corridor, but at the same time, the Arctic is a huge point of friction.
The Arctic is a complete contradiction in their policy. You have China asserting itself as a near-Arctic state, while Carney is aggressively reasserting Canadian sovereignty up there, expanding military presence to every day of the year.
So they're taking Chinese money for infrastructure in the south, while challenging Beijing's strategic interests in the north.
Exactly. It's a very difficult balancing act.
Which brings us right back to the core structural problem here. The defining challenge of this whole mission, what the source material summarizes as the impossible strategic triangle.
That's the crux of it. Carney cannot simultaneously do all three things. 1, reset relations with China to diversify. 2, maintain that preferential access to American markets through CUSMA. And 3, resist American pressure to align completely. One of those legs has to bend.
And the world is watching to see which one it is. The sources note that European partners who are facing similar pressure from the U.S. might see this not as legitimate middle power diplomacy, but as proof of American accusations about Western weakness.
And that global scrutiny just makes the outcome of this visit so critical. For you, the listener, tracking this, there are 3 possible scenarios, and Carney's actions next week will tell us which path Canada is on.
Okay, let's lay them out. Scenario A, the path of least resistance.
Scenario A is strategic capitulation. Canada fully aligns with U.S. policy, accepts the CUSMA constraints, the China firewall, and basically gives up on a comprehensive reset. It saves continental market access but leaves them vulnerable to U.S. pressure down the road.
Scenario B, the pragmatic middle path.
Scenario B is tactical accommodation. This is where Canada gets some modest tariff relief, like on canola, and they keep the dialogue going, but they limit any real substantive economic integration. It satisfies domestic farmers without triggering Washington, but it doesn't achieve that meaningful diversification they want.
And then the riskiest path, Scenario C.
Scenario C is strategic defiance. Canada just goes for it. Proceeds with comprehensive China engagement, accepts the risks with CUSMA, and then tries to build a coalition of other middle powers, like Australia or some European nations. This maximizes autonomy in the long run, but it risks immediate economic pain and diplomatic isolation.
Carney's stated goal is clear, right? Moving from reliance to resilience. He wants to double non-U.S. exports. But the world has just fundamentally shifted. He's trying to navigate in a world that demands a binary choice.
It is a profound test. The U.S. is not tolerating strategic ambiguity from its neighbors anymore. This Carney mission is a critical test for Canada, yes, but really for all G7 partners facing this choice between Atlantic integration and Pacific diversification.
A test for Canada, and maybe for the idea of independent middle power foreign policy itself.
Indeed.
So what does this all mean for you as you watch the headlines come out of Beijing next week? The sources make it clear that Canada's old approach, the wheat diplomacy model, it just may not be viable anymore. The fundamental risk has changed.
The shift is dramatic. I mean, the U.S. operationalizing its hemispheric doctrine with military action in Venezuela, it makes the question of alignment immediate. It's not abstract. The Trump corollary is an overt 21st century statement. And strategic ambiguity, the very thing that made middle power diplomacy work, is now seen by Washington as a form of betrayal.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question raised by all of this as we head into 2026. Does middle power diplomacy even have a future in an era of great power spheres of influence? Or is the delicate, variable geometry that Carney is attempting? Is it the last gasp of a post-Cold War international system that simply no longer exists?
Something for you to think about as those headlines start rolling in.
We'll be watching. Thanks for diving in with us.